Let's continue working on their forecast modeling using Excel by looking at the example with additional assumptions. Here you can see their Apple consolidated statement of operations with 3 years of actual results, and we will forecast for year 4 and try to model their result for the next year. As an example before, we will keep our assumptions separate from our forecast calculation. And we're going to do it to make sure that if we need to change our assumptions or run different scenarios, we don't need to rewrite the formula or make any changes in the formula. We just can refer to the assumption cells, and even if the assumptions change it will be reflected in our forecast calculation through the formulas immediately. So let's look at the assumptions. First assumption is about sales. We will assume that net sales will increase 7% compared to year 3. And I'm going to put 7% over here. And we'll use it in a formula when I'm going to be calculating net sales for year 4. For cost of sales, we will assume that our cost of sales will be at the same level compared to sales as it was in year 3, meaning that percentage of cost of sale over sales will be the same as it was in year 3. And to use this assumption, I need to calculate it. And I will do it by dividing my actual cost of sales in year 3, which is in cells B10. I will divide it by net sales, actual net sales in year 3, which is in cells B9. And this is percentage I will use when I will be calculating cost of sales for year 4. For next expense, research and development, we will assume that this expense will increase 50% in year 4. So I'm going to put just 15% right here and reference to that number when calculating this expense in year 4. For selling general administrative expenses, I will apply similar methodology as we used for the cost of sales. So we will keep percentage of selling general and administrative expense over net sales as it was in year 3. And I need to calculate it, and I will do it by dividing their general selling and administrative actual expense in year 3, which is in cell B15. I will divide it by net sales, which is in B9. Similar assumptions we will apply for other income. So we need to calculate the percentage of other income over net sales and apply the same percentage to year 4. So we will calculate it by dividing the other income expense, which is in cell B19. We will divide it by our net sales, which is in B9. For the provision for income tax, we will assume that the effective tax rate will stay the same in year 4 as it was in year 3. And it means that the percentage of income tax over income before tax will stay the same. And we will need to calculate effective tax rate by dividing the provision for income taxes, which is in year 3, which is in cells B 21, and we will divide it by income before income taxes. And the actual for year 3 income before income taxes is in cell B20. And we will use this effective tax rate to calculate the provision for income tax in year 4. So I have all my assumptions, but I'm gonna name each of them and give each of these assumptions a meaningful name. So when anyone will look at my forecast, anyone will be able to follow which assumption was applied, and the formula I'm going to be using will have some meaning to anyone who would review the forecast model. So let's start with sales increase, and to name the range or cell, you select your cell or range, right click and select define names. And I don't want to have any actual assumption as a part of my name, so I'm going to remove this 7 over year 3, and then just will leave a sales increase. And I'm doing it again to have my model as much flexible as possible in case I need to change the assumptions. Next is cost of sales assumption. Similar, we select define name, and I will just make it cost of sale, and I use ASS as a short for assumption. The same for the next expense. Just make it short but meaningful. Then selling general expense assumption for that thing. And now we need to name other income expense assumption. Similar approach. And for their provision for income tax assumption, I will name it effective tax rate, because that's what it is. So it's gonna be effective tax rate. Okay, now I'm ready to use this assumption in my forecast. I also will be referring to the actual result in year 3 in my forecast, and I want to use their meaningful name for all my actual P&L line items. So my formula would be easily understood by anyone, as we discussed before. So I will name all these line items with the names. I will give each of it a name. So define names, net sell, great. And I will probably just add year 3. So again, anyone can understand what actual results my forecast is based on. Not valid now. I guess I need to put the dash. Cost of sales, again, we'll name it. I'm just gonna add the year 3 here. Gross margin would be just calculated, don't need to name it. Research and development will be named. Similar, just adding year 3. Similar here. don't need to name total operating expense. It's calculated. Operating income is also calculated. And I'm gonna name that. Other income that's need to be named. Add in there year 3. Income before tax is calculated. Don't need to name it. Provision for income tax need to be named. We'll just add year 3. Okay, here we go. Now I am ready to put their forecast together by using my actual for year 3 and my assumptions. So my forecasted net sales would be their actual in year 3 increased by 7%, which is 1 times 1 plus the assumption as well. And you can see when I click in there on the cell, it doesn't give me the cell reference, it gives me the name, the way I name it. So immediately my formula has their meaning instead of just referring to the cells. Good to format it all at the same time. So to format the cell, you right click, you select format cell, and you select the format you're going to use. We can use accounting, and since in my original actual numbers none of the decimals were used, I will keep it the same and I will remove the decimals, but I will keep the $sign. So it's right here. Next is cost of sale, and cost of sale should be at the same percentage over my net sales as it was in year 3. So I will apply my assumption by taking my forecasted net sales and multiplying by percentage based on actuals that we calculated. And that was my assumption, and that's how it's gonna be reflected in the formula. Again, to keep it consistent, there in all other line items there is no $sign except in their first net sales. So I'm going to change my format from accounting to just a number. I'm going to remove the decimals, and it's going to be consistent with what we had in actual statement of operations. Now I need to calculate the gross margin, and my gross margin is just simply net sales minus cost of sales. Cost of sales. Research and development, same approach. We use their calculated percentage based on the actual and apply to their forecasted net sales. I'm gonna refer to that net sales and multiply by my percentage for research and development. A little bit different for research and development. I didn't pay attention to assumption. The research and development is 15% increase. So I'm gonna use the similar approach as I used to calculate net sales, meaning I am taking the research and development actual in year 3, and I will increase it by 15%, which would be one of the way to put in a formula would be times 1 plus my increase percentage. So that's it for research and development. It's not based on the percentage of net sales, it just increased over the actual research and development expense in year 3. So when you're going to be putting your forecast, make sure you follow the assumptions and use the correct assumptions for each line items. Selling and general administrative expense. this is where I can apply this percentage to their projected net sales and this way calculate the forecasted selling and general administrative expense. I want to make this formula meaningful as well, so I will name their forecasted net sales and refer to that cell by the name. So define name again, and it's would be year 4 net cell, and I need to add that. Okay, so now I'm ready. I'm gonna be using my net cell and calculating percentage that my research into my selling general administrative expense was in year 3, and that would be my projected selling general administrative expense. And total operating expense is basically sum of these two expenses, research and development and selling in general and administrative expense. So it's just sum of these two. I will add some formatting to make it consistent right here, so I can do multiple cells at the same time. So I'm gonna select all these 3 cells, I right click, select format cell, and I'm gonna use number, and I'm gonna remove the decimals. I also need to have the cells in separation there, so we're gonna use the cells in separator right here again to have it consistent to how it was reported in the previous years. Now we need to calculate operating income, and operating income is the gross margin minus total operating expense. We will use the same formula in here. To make it meaningful, I can name that the gross margin, and it's going to be year 4 gross margin. Again, don't forget to put the underscore here. Oh, it doesn't like. Okay, $sign. Yeah, I just mistyped it, sorry. Year 4 gross margin and total operating expense need to be named as well. Year 4 so it's going to be year 4 operating expense. Okay, now my operating income would be gross margin minus operating expense. I will name the operating income as well, because it's I will be using this in my forecast, and we'll give the meaningful name to that as well. Year 4 income. Okay, so now we need to apply our assumptions to other income expense, and it's percentage of sale as it was in year 3. So I'm going to be referring to the net sales times my percentage assumption. And after that, I can calculate income before provision for income tax, which basically operating income minus other income on net. In this case, I don't have expense, it's income, so I'm going to be adding up to my operating income this other income. So it will be other income, operating income plus other income. And again, if I will name this formula, this cell, other income expense, which I will, my formula will have all the named cells and will be easy to follow. So it's going to be year 4, other income. And if I change it, if I kind of redo it again, the formula will have all the names. Provision for income tax, it's my effective tax rate applied to their income before provision of income tax. And I will name this cell as well. And it's going to be net income before tax, which is net income before tax, which usually the abbreviation you use for that item in the P&L. So, and calculate the provision for income taxes by multiplying my net income before tax by effective tax rate. And that's my tax. And my net income is, and I'm gonna name this range income tax, year 4. So my net income is net income before tax minus my tax. I will apply some formatting for all of these cells, again, to be consistent. And I will make them number, use the separator, and no decimals. We can also add some formatting lines to make sure that we, again, consistent with what was done. And I will use their borders. So to use the borders, you go to File, select the borders, and then select the borders that you want to apply to that. And it's looked like they were applying using something like that for that line items, and for this, and for this, and for that, it was just one line, upper line, which would be top border. Okay, now it's look consistent, and we done with our forecast for year 4.